Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. And thank you everyone for joining us for the first recording of High Marks, Dr. Robin Goldstein's State Weed Rankings. My name is Riana Durrett, and I'm the Executive Director of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas's Cannabis Policy Institute and one of your co-hosts today. I'm going to make some introductions and then hand it over to Dr. Goldstein to debut his rankings report. The Cannabis Policy Institute was first launched in August 2023 with the vision to expand, promote, and coordinate cannabis research, policy, and education at UNLV and beyond. One of the many ways we bring this vision to life is through regular panel discussions and webinars that spark conversation and connect the cannabis research and policy communities. I recommend everyone check out our activities, including our policy reports and our upcoming second annual policy symposium, just to name a couple. Today's show is based around Dr. Robin Goldstein's state cannabis rankings, which were first published in a CPI report this March and will be updated and released through the High Marks show on a quarterly basis. Dr. Robin Goldstein is the director of the Cannabis Economics Group at UC Davis, where he also studies the cannabis, food, wine, and beer industries. He looks at consumer behavior, retail price trends, regulations, testing costs, legal versus illegal markets, and the economic impacts of policy. Dr. Goldstein has an AB in neuroscience and philosophy from Harvard, a JD from Yale Law School, and a PhD in economics from the University of Bordeaux. I've had the good fortune of working with Robin on multiple projects, including his weed rankings and the report on the Nevada cannabis economy. For the first episode of High Marks, both Dr. Goldstein and I are honored to welcome the show's first special guest, Director Adria Berry. Adria is the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority, as well as a licensed attorney in Oklahoma and Texas with extensive experience in government affairs and public policy. She earned her JD from University of Tulsa College of Law, where she received a certificate in public policy and regulation as well. And given her background, and I'm sure anybody who's talked to her for 5 minutes understands why she's the boss. And we are very appreciative that she agreed to join us today. Robin, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce your rankings.
Hi, Rihanna. Thank you. Thanks to Adria for being here. I want to thank the Cannabis Policy Institute and Natalie and the whole team that's helped make this possible. I'm very excited for the inaugural edition of the rankings show, which I think will be very fun. I'll first say a few words about what the rankings are. First of all, they're subjective. I take data. I look at data from all 50 states, and I compare the cannabis industries and their prospects in the different states. Now, obviously, this isn't just about cannabis GDP in each state. The biggest states would win easily in that game, but it's about how each state is doing given its size. Let's say per capita, and it's not any one measure. It's a combination of different measures, but the overall way of thinking about it is looking into the future. What's the weed economy in the United States and in the world going to look like a few years from now? Nobody knows whether federal legalization is a year off or 10 years off, or what the nature of interstate commerce is going to be each year in the near future. But someday there's going to be interstate trade in weed, and some states are going to win and some states are going to lose in the game of competition between states about selling products. But every state has a chance to win. And a lot of people, the last report that kind of brought about this project was called "Where Will Weed Win?" I get the question a lot, what does it mean for weed to win? It means lots of different things. But for me, it's first about the legal market. So it's kind of defeating the illegal market, the legal market becoming the dominant way of selling and buying and consuming weed. Secondly, it's about states having economic gains, tax collections, prosperity, and happiness and well-being for the people in the states, and how much the cannabis industry is able to contribute to that in each state. Some states, have legalized very early on. California, where I'm based, we have a 30-year almost tradition now of legal weed of some form. and some states are very early in the process. And so when I put together these rankings, it's also with a view to that. It's not fair to a state that legalized a couple years ago to compare it. You're not comparing apples to apples with a state that's had 10 or 20 years to develop its industry. But one of the things I look at, aside from how far along legalization is, what are the attitudes, how the regulators have treated the industry, um, is really the economic factors, and starting with tax rates and regulatory factors, but also what are the costs of producing weed in each state. So from the production side, that some of the states that are going to have really good opportunities in a post interstate commerce world are going to be states that are able to compete at the lower end of price, to sell at a really low price, um, and reach people all over the country that way, because most demand of consumers for weed, like for most products in any economy, is at the lower end of the price scale. Most consumers are very price sensitive and want to buy the cheapest satisfactory product they can find. And so as with craft beer, there's going to continue to be a high-end market for premium products, but the bigger part of the market is going to be the mainstream market, where there's really going to be fierce competition in price. And we're already seeing that in a lot of states, even though it's still gated, even though we're in a economy where each state cannot legally export to another state or import from another state, and you see big price differences between the East and West Coast, for example. You're seeing prices falling rapidly across the country. In every state, prices are falling, and in some states they're falling like dramatically. In some cases, this has been cause for alarm, and I think it puts some people out of business who weren't ready for these low prices, businesses that weren't tooled to produce at such low prices, or retailers who were counting on more revenue per customer, than the current market's allowing. But in the long run, one of the big kind of points I want to make, and points that are driving these rankings, is that in the long run, lower prices are actually going to be a good thing for the weed economy in any state, because they're going to be more competitive in an interstate market. And so the same states that are kind of where some people are suffering from this fierce competition that's driving down prices, like Michigan, Massachusetts, and some states that have fallen really far in the last couple of years, those states are going to be actually better tooled in the future to compete with other states. And so that's kind of the silver lining for what they're going through. So that's the context I want to just start out with in terms of the rankings. And without further ado, I want to start with, I'm going to put up a slide. We're going to do this in the style of like a college football rankings countdown. We're going to do 5 at a time, starting with number 25. We have the top 25 states. And I'm going to introduce the numbers, start with numbers 25 to 20, and talk about a couple states that have fallen out of the top 25 this quarter. And then I'm going to get Riana's and Adria's reactions, and we can take audience questions. I want to invite you all to submit questions in real time all throughout, and we panelists, the 3 of us, will be able to see them. And so we can't promise to answer them all at that moment, but don't hold on till later. You can submit them at any point. So let's go on to slide number 1. 25 to 20. Sorry, 25 to 21. So in the bottom 5 of the top 25, numbers 25 through 21, we have 3 states that are new to the top 25, which means that there's 3 states that have also dropped out of the top 25. And those are the only 3 new states. None of the new states made the top 20, and all 3 states that fell out were in this range too. So I'll first start with Connecticut. New to the top 25, we are. I grew up in Massachusetts, and so I still spend a lot of time with my family there. And there's been an interesting situation in New England for a long time. Massachusetts was the first to legalize in New England, and the east of the Mississippi, Massachusetts had the first recreational legalization. And so for a long time, New Yorkers were coming up to Massachusetts to buy weed. Connecticut was late in the game, so they never really benefited from that cross-border. It's not technically legal. Consumers are not allowed to bring it back to other states, but that's of course was happening. And so as New York has rolled out its system, Connecticut and Massachusetts have lost some of that business. But the reason that New York has fallen out of the top 25 this quarter is because they've just had the latest in a long series of problems there. 100 looks like 150 dispensaries are about to close, or are going to be stopped from opening. Maybe 50 or 60 having to close because of a reinterpretation of a rule about how far from schools they can be. And so every time New York takes another hit like that, Connecticut and to some extent Massachusetts benefit. But Connecticut's not just benefiting from that. They have really rolled out their system in a short amount of time, pretty fast, and they've opened a lot of dispensaries in a short amount of time. Prices are still pretty high compared to Massachusetts, but they're lower than New York. And so Connecticut people who were going to New York for weed are now able to buy in their home state. Illinois, new to the top 25, they've been growing the hemp industry alongside the cannabis industry, which is kind of rare in the US. Most states have either gone one direction or the other, largely. But Illinois has a thriving hemp industry. They still have some of the highest prices in the country for recreational cannabis, flower, and other products. So that's why they're still, although it's a big state with lots of demand, more than 12 million people, they still are kind of in the bottom end of the top 25 because of their high prices. And New Jersey, the other newcomer in the top 25, has also just been ramping up really fast, again benefiting from New York's failures. But they've been making strides in terms of consumption lounges. Not many states have really, or businesses have really figured out consumption lounges anywhere in the country. But New Jersey is now in that game, and we'll see where it goes. Puerto Rico falls quite a few slots because of a moratorium on new opening of establishments. They already had very sparse coverage of retail, and now they've stopped new retail applications. So they're kind of going nowhere fast in terms of rolling out the system. I'll start with that and get a couple of reactions from Riana and Adria, if you've got any comments on this 21 to 25 group.
Well, I don't really have many comments. I guess my first comment was finding it interesting that Puerto Rico would be in the top 25, but New York isn't, especially when we're talking about economics, especially for talking about the future of interstate commerce here. So that is really the first thing that struck me about this part of the list.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, one could argue that Puerto Rico was vastly overrated in the first edition of these rankings, but there are some reasons for why I was bullish on Puerto Rico then, and I still now think there's big potential there. One is the really long tradition of growing know-how. They've been growing really high quality outdoor weed in Puerto Rico for generations. There's really strong consumer demand across the board. A lot of people in Puerto Rico are in the market and know the product. The thing is that it's really dominated by illegal still. So I mean, it's an island. Obviously, it's not going to. In terms of exports, who knows? Maybe they've got they probably don't have that much potential to compete in the very low end on the mass market. But at the same time, they have a big tourist industry there. A lot of visitors who would love to try, I think, local products. And they also have also have the lowest labor cost. One of the things I looked at in putting together these rankings was the labor costs. And other costs like electricity, water, and other input costs into weed. And Puerto Rico has the lowest labor costs in the country, and so that's a big input into production. So it's possible that although island economies, things tend to be expensive, they can make up for that with labor and have competitively priced weed that people would come there and buy, as opposed to the mass market stuff coming from elsewhere.
I would just add that the New York situation with the shutting down the dispensaries that are too close to schools when they had been told they could open, I would be losing sleep if I was in New York. I cannot imagine how the regulators are handling that. And you would think there would be they have to find a way to work that out, because the license holders would probably have a really good case to say that they have a property right? You don't have a property right in a license application, but once you are awarded a license, you have a property right. So I'm rooting for the dispensaries not getting shut down.
Yeah, I think that's quite possible. There's definitely going to be lawsuits, but legal lawsuits and legal gridlock and battles that don't help the industry. don't really help anyone. So that'll happen, you know, and it'll take a year. There's been lawsuits already in the past about the rollout of the social equity program, and the, you know, people who basically lost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars because there was just no movement in terms of getting their spaces open for bureaucratic reasons. And so, yeah, they're used to lawsuits. New York City is the world's probably biggest demand, probably biggest fan of any city in the world. So there's huge consumer demand in New York. I mean, obviously, consumer retail spending on marijuana in the city of New York and the state of New York are enormous. You know, this is an example of a state that gets really penalized in my rankings because of how much it's really like squandered a lot of this opportunity to date. I do think that you're right. In the long run, you know, New York's going to be a huge market for weed, but will it be actually a big market where local producers and local businesses are really taking advantage of it, or will it just be, you know, kind of integrated into retail like cigarettes are, and New York State doesn't really benefit from the economy? I think a lot of that will depend on on-premise consumption, the future of consumption lounges. If New York being a huge tourist city, also, and hospitality industry, restaurant industry there, if that could become integrated in the future, as with Las Vegas, another city where that's very important, you know, then New York could benefit a lot more from cannabis than otherwise. Yeah. All right, let's move on to 2216. Here we've got, I'm not going to go, there's going to be a document distributed after I go through these rankings. After the reveal, you're all, everyone on this call and the public will get access to my explanations for, you know, little movements, and every state has a little capsule. So I'm not going to stop and tell you about every state. I'm going to talk about the big movements. So Tennessee. Tennessee dropped 8 spots. Tennessee was number 10 in the last rankings, and they're down to number 18. And the reason why is Tennessee's hemp industry was basically leading the way in the whole country. They were the first state to, you know, in this legally questionable gray area, they were the first state to start selling THCA, quote unquote THCA flower as hemp. Built a big industry that way, but not just with flower. Across the board, they were leaders in hemp, and they started exporting to many other states. And the legislature in Tennessee was very early to actually enable this by passing a 2023 law saying that THCA and other compounds were allowable as hemp. And then basically in the last few months, they've totally changed course, made a U-turn on this, and banned THC flower from Tennessee. They've shut down a huge industry there. And so, you know, the industry will continue to thrive, I think, in underground ways. Like they'll still keep exporting, and they'll still keep arguing that they, and probably there'll be lawsuits there too over the new bill. But for the moment, Tennessee has gone from, you know, a shining example of what hemp economy could turn into in some southeastern states, and then states around Tennessee like Kentucky, North Carolina. Kentucky's moving up in part because Tennessee moves down. So there's this southeastern kind of power in hemp production, and including export to other hemp states like Florida and Texas. But the states around it, like North Carolina and Kentucky, that have still allowed the hemp industry, including THCA. Now Tennessee, the sort of pioneer, has shut it down. So it's kind of an ironic development. Montana has one of the, it's a small state, you know, it's a thinly populated state. It's surprised a lot of people that it was so highly ranked in the last rankings, but they you know, low prices, low retail prices, and really high per capita revenues. They had really good numbers, but now they've basically also turned in a different direction, like not as dramatically as Tennessee. Montana, you have legal cannabis. This isn't a hemp state, but you have basically freeze of new licenses, and a movement to limit THC in flower to 15%, which would kill a huge amount of the flower segment. And so there's just resistance there, I think, to the growth of the industry. So that's my 16 to 20. Hot takes, comments?
I just got an image, it popped in my mind of if this show existed like 5 years ago and I was still working in the Nevada industry and we would go to the regulators and say, we dropped 4 points in Robin's rankings, we got to get him back up. um, uh, there's one other, this is not on the ranking, maybe never will be. But I wanted to share something that I thought was funny and representative of our policy in the US right now. Or general prohibition. I did some research about an unrelated topic. I called the Iowa Department of Revenue, obviously not legal in Iowa, right? And it's when you first call, it says press 1 for general sales, 2 for alcohol, and 3 for the lottery. So you have general sales, alcohol, and lottery. It comprises the economy there, but cannabis, that you wouldn't even bring it up in Iowa. I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, amazing. Such an important farming state, and they've been like more than almost anyone else just not moving at all on cannabis. It's very interesting. There's plenty of consumer demand there.
Director Berry, do you have anything to add on this slide?
Not much about the actual rankings, but I did want to say Louisiana is a state I've been watching. I'm so interested in their partnership with one of their public universities. I mean, isn't that pretty rare? Or are they the only, does that happen often? I don't really know from my perspective, but I was surprised that Louisiana partners with a university on at all in their industry. Do you know much about that, Dr. Goldstein?
Not much, but I think it's I think it may be a federal program, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Yeah, they've shown they're definitely I think Louisiana has shown a willingness to sort of see where this is going. Louisiana has allowed hemp beverages formally they've passed laws allowing THC beverages. They recently dialed it back from previously like 10 or 20 milligram cans were legal and were all over the place, and now it's down to 5 milligrams. That's not really going to kill the THC beverage market. It limits it somewhat, but it's on the hemp side that I'm kind of looking at the state's current economic development. But I think Louisiana it's also a state with low costs, and it's like strategically located, and Texas is in total turmoil right now, as you know, and so Louisiana it's a very interesting state. It's one that I think could go way up or way down depending on how policy goes in the surrounding areas. But I think that the academic collaboration is signals an openness that I think is very Louisiana. And they're like Lone Ranger kind of attitude. That they have their own civil law code. They do things their own way. They're like another country, and so I think they're not going to be scared, I think, to buck some trends and to maybe dare to be leaders in the future.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So cool. Well, let's move on to number 15 then. 15 to 11. So Minnesota, which was like rapidly rising up the ranks, and Minnesota was on its way up to the top 10. They have this interesting system where they're really integrating cannabis and hemp better than most other states. They've set the same tax rate for both, and they have the biggest per capita THC beverage industry, and maybe just the biggest absolute THC beverage industry in the country. They've integrated that with the craft beer producers, which is really exciting and interesting for THC beverages. You see declining alcohol consumption across the country, and this is a way that some breweries and also restaurants and bars are able to maybe make up for some of those lost alcohol sales. It's an alternative with an intoxicating beverage they can sell at a profit. So Minnesota was doing great, and then they just raised the tax rate from 10 to 15% on everything, cannabis and hemp, and that's a huge raise. And so that's why they went from kind of scaling up the rankings to stagnating now with the 15%. North Carolina, again, is kind of still got this hemp industry going strong, and as other states kind of shut parts of it down, it's just benefiting more and more. There's no regulation still at all on hemp, and it's a problem everywhere it's happening. It's a safety issue. It's, no one wants underage people to be able to go and buy potent marijuana products at convenience stores. And so North Carolina, like Texas and other states, needs to do something to regulate it. But the fact that they've not done anything to shut it down, they're letting it continue to develop, is helping the industry. And that North Carolina, like Kentucky, has a lot of inexpensive farmland, lots of farmers, great farmers, and a lot of the tobacco settlements a couple decades back in that region. There's these farmers and farmland that's not really getting, I think, utilized that well, and so hemp has turned into a promising business there. And so North Carolina has big export potential. Massachusetts, my home state, has been just, prices are just absolutely plummeting like crazy, like probably more than any other state in the country. And that's why they're moving up, even though, as I said earlier, people are going to complain about it because it doesn't help everyone when prices kind of crash, but it helps consumers and it helps the industry's future in an interstate market. Texas is in the middle of a absolutely bitter battle in the state legislature between one side that's trying to completely shut down the THC hemp industry, which is like $3 or $4 billion, maybe $4.5 billion at this point. The biggest hemp industry in the country, and one of the biggest cannabis industries in the country, thousands of stores, tens of thousands of jobs. And so there's but it's not clear what the outcome is going to be. Governor Abbott vetoed at the last minute a bill that was about to shut down the industry, and then they went to special session, and now they're having another battle in special session. No one knows how it's going to come out. So Texas is probably the biggest wild card in this whole rankings. They could, if they allow the hemp industry to continue in a substantial way, including allowing flower, then it go back up to the top 10. If they shut it all down, it'll plummet in the next rankings. So we'll see. Comment. And Adria, you're next door to Texas, and obviously Oklahoma has a lot of. You're affected by them; they're affected by you. What are your thoughts on Texas?
Oh man, I've been watching Texas closely for a while, and I lived in Houston for a really long time. So every time I'd go down and visit and see the signs to, purchase THC this way, and I saw it growing and growing and growing. It was just a matter of time. I guess I knew it was a matter of time before something big was going to happen, because it seems like there were heads buried in the sand versus having conversations early on. And we actually invited some of the team from Texas to come up to Oklahoma. They came and spent, I think, 2 days with us to see how we operate inside of the OMMA, how we've set up our regulatory agency, just trying to help them get a little bit ahead. And I just felt for them, because I thought, they don't really have a lot of support, because it's the people we were meeting with were from the compassionate care program. So that very small program, the whole state of Texas, I think, had like 2 or 3 growers in the entire state of Texas. So then, of course, it left the door open for this huge hemp industry to just come in and take over. So it's very interesting. But I also wanted to ask you a question, if you don't mind, about North Carolina, because another thing I've been watching closely is the Eastern Band of Cherokees. Did you take into consideration the tribal impact in North Carolina? I know you talked about hemp, but I mean, are you watching their economic impact on weed in North Carolina?
The tribal impact in North Carolina, definitely I did not. I'm working with a really cool tribal project with Riana, actually, in California, but I don't know much about that. That's very interesting. What's going on there with the tribal? Yeah.
Oh, they came out and actually visited with us as well, just to see how we do things, because they were setting up their own regulatory program. They regulate their own marijuana market within the state of North Carolina on their sovereign land. So
wow, interesting.
Yeah, and there are states that have compacts. I'm sure Riana can talk much more about that than I can, but I like to watch it and learn as it's going on state by state, because it's a different relationship state by state with tribal sovereign governments. So I think it's something that
so that's being sold as being sold as marijuana, that's not hemp. That's,
as far as I know, they're
legal weed.
Marijuana. Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
That's fascinating. I can't wait to learn more about that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Director Berry. I had thought about bringing it up, but I wasn't sure how to articulate the question. I definitely would like the high marks at some point to take into account tribal cannabis. I think the data is sometimes even more difficult to obtain, understandably so. But I'm thinking we could do an episode on it specifically, if nothing else. So I think it's a great topic to cover.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I'd love to.
It could be like a future episode, just diving into that, because it's so diverse across the US right now on how it's done in different states.
Yeah, that similarly in New Mexico, when I was just there for a little while, and well, it's not the same because it's not illegal there for the state license market, but there are a lot of tribally owned operations there. And I would love to see, Dr. Goldstein, I would love to see you look at New Mexico specifically and Santa Fe and see what the illegal market situation is there, because they would be a good test case for if you have proliferation of access. It's everywhere in downtown Santa Fe. In fact, of course, there's been pushback on that, but the dispensaries are they've got to be. Yeah. They're definitely more than the Starbucks. I'd say there's probably 5 dispensaries to every 1 Starbucks, if not more. So you can test your theory on, access reducing illegal market.
Yeah, well, they're definitely not just serving the New Mexico population, that's for sure. Let's go on to now we're into the top 10, and we have Missouri is the highest mover in our whole rankings this quarter. So Missouri rises 8 spots to number 10. And this is just the second edition of these rankings, and the first edition was quarter 2, which was in late April, early May. I'm trying to get more scientific about this every time. I'm taking more data into account every time. So some of these movements, I think for this time around, is like I think I might have underrated Missouri the first time, but there's really exciting things happening there. The data coming in, they're going gangbusters with sales at the same time as other states are stagnating in sales. One of the important reasons not to look at total retail sales or total quote unquote market size as an indicator of how well a state's doing, even per capita, is because as prices fall, if quantity doesn't rise dramatically, the total retail sales is price times quantity. So if prices fall enough, you're still going to have stagnating or even declining total sales, even if you have increasing quantity. No one's going to suddenly double the amount of pot smokers in a state. No one really wants that, over in a year or two. So, but the idea is by bring more and more business to the legal market. The thing that brings most business to the legal market and takes business away from illegal is low prices, because when illegal is too expensive, it can't compete with legal. When legal is too expensive, can't compete with illegal, then more business stays in the illegal market. So when prices fall, and you see overall revenues not rising, that can be a really good thing. But Missouri, not only are prices falling and quantity rising, but overall revenues rising because they're just really taking off. And so they have low electricity, low labor costs. They have low costs, low prices. They also have hemp business there. It's another one of the few states that have kind of both that are where both those markets are operating. So Missouri is an exciting state to watch. Florida is basically a big hemp state. They have almost no legal system. Adria, you were mentioning before in Texas, they have almost no medical system. Absolutely true. They only have like 3 dispensaries. They've just passed a law to open a few more, but that system's almost non-existent. They also had a 0.3%, a 1% THC limit, so they basically didn't have a flower market for medical, which is just basically no market to speak of. Florida has a little bit more of a medical market, but it's not big. It's kind of a cartel. It's very few operators, a few big chains that have these kind of state. They're in with the state, and there's not that. It's not a very competitive market. It's expensive. So hemp is. But Florida's been, as Texas is in turmoil, Tennessee's shutting down. So Florida's like this other big hemp state. They have a big THC beverage business. They're a big exporter of hemp. DeSantis, like Abbott a couple of years ago, vetoed a bill that would have kind of shut a lot of that down. And so Florida's flying high in hemp still. It could change at any minute. It's volatile, but Florida's a huge market, big tourist market. And if they allow this industry to continue to flourish, whether or not they legalize recreational, which they keep trying to do and failing, it'll still continue growing and having more and more potential as an exporter in the future.
Robin, we did get a question, and
oh, great.
I'm typing it in the chat, and it's from our friend Mark Hauser. I'm taking the time to do this because this is exactly what we want: audience participation and a little bit of controversy here.
Great. Hi, Mark.
he's not familiar with the statistics that went into it, and they and how they were generated, and he believes they conflate a lot of non-hemp operations. And I would mention that there will be more information coming out about how they're compiled, but go ahead and respond to that.
Yep. So again, subjective. I look at costs. I look at revenues. I look at revenues per customer. I look at both the cannabis and hemp industries. I look at how far along they are and how much opportunity they've had. So the short answer to that is, in the future, if you look 5 or 10 years in the future, this is mostly about the future, about who's going to do best in the future, and it's one plant. Hemp and cannabis are going to be. If you fast forward 10 years from now, they're going to be treated in the same way, I believe, if for in any way reasonable about it. And so the states that are doing well in hemp right now are going to have a leg up in a federal, interstate, and a federally legal market. The states that are doing well in cannabis are also going to have a leg up. The states that have been in either business longer and have generated a significant export economy will do well. And so whether right now it's called cannabis or it's called hemp is, I think it's a thing of this moment that's less important than some people might think. You look at some of the big multinational or multi-state producers of THC beverages, for example. They're selling this exactly the same THC beverages as cannabis in 15 states and as hemp in 15 other states. It's the same product, it's the same brand, it's the same taste and the same dose. And so these markets can and will converge as soon as the federal government gets more reasonable about policy. Comments from you guys on that question, because it's interesting. Yeah.
I'm going to hold mine for the next 5. And next time I need a sound effect for the top 5.
All right, cool. So top 5.
Boop, 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 boop.
Surprise, surprise. It's not only because Oklahoma is number 1 that we wanted to have Adria as a guest. Actually, we met at CANRA, the Cannabis Regulators Association, had a great conversation, and I thought she'd be a really cool guest. But it's also a happy coincidence that Oklahoma maintains its position as number 1 last year. And one of the funny things that we were talking about, I said, "Oh, how do you feel about Oklahoma being number 1?" I'll give her a chance to respond to that afterwards. But I'm not sure that that's what she's exactly going for. She's trying to she's juggling a lot of regulatory and governmental issues, and the larger point there is that regulators are not, the only goal is not to increase the number of dollars that's made from cannabis, or certainly not the amount of cannabis consumed. It's managing health and safety and the interests of the state and the interests of lawmakers and different groups of people in the state, some of whom support and others whom oppose cannabis. And so but I'll start with Nevada. Nevada keeps its position at number 5. Nevada is the smallest state by far in the top 10 in terms of population, and the reason why it's pulling way above its weight, I think, in these rankings is because of a few things. Really low cost compared to any of these other states other than Oklahoma in the top 5. Really low cost of production, lots of available land, and really a big upside potential with tourism. And I think that that Nevada is exploring that and trying to figure it out. It's by fits and starts. It's a work in progress everywhere, with consumption lounges, figuring out how to reach tourists, how to integrate cannabis with hospitality. Nevada faces a big challenge in terms of gaming, the separation between gaming and cannabis that we've spent many hours and other sessions talking about. But it's really, Nevada is all about the upside. The upside there, especially if gaming and cannabis and the Las Vegas Strip can be kind of brought into the market in a real way. California, obviously the world leader in cannabis, the best weed in the world. For 50 years, they've been exporting more than anyone else, legal, illegal, anything. Now they've been exporting hemp, and that's kind of been limited by a new law. But California is as strong as ever in terms of production, and the prices have continued to fall. So California prices are low. You can get an eighth of weed at almost any dispensary in California, a good eighth for like $10, on special or something. 15 is like a mid-range price now. It's fallen a lot. People from the East Coast just can't believe how cheap weed is in California, Oregon too. But the thing that has hurt California, that caused it to drop a spot in this week, is the rise in excise tax to up to 19%, which is not what the state needed, in terms of, there's a lot of businesses still there struggling, and the tax increase was not helpful at all. So you're going to have more businesses suffering from that, and consumers still buying illegal weed. Every time you raise the tax a little bit, more share goes to illegal. Michigan has the lowest prices by far east of the Mississippi, and they have some of the lowest prices in the country. It's the only state kind of in the east that's competing on price with West Coast. They have huge competition, fierce competition. A lot of people are not surviving, but the prices are unbelievably low. And I think Michigan could be a powerhouse in the future in terms of exporting. They're strategically located. They could really be distributing a lot across the Midwest. And Oregon, similar factors to California, long history there, high quality and very low prices. And finally, Oklahoma. So Oklahoma came on the scene, and Oklahoma is the only medical-only state in this top 5. The amazing thing about Oklahoma from the start, the numbers were just, every time I started analyzing numbers when I was studying cannabis economics from the beginning, you compare the prices, and you compare the retail coverage and all these other sort of metrics, and Oklahoma just like jumps off the page about how much faster it rolled out. They were very places open right away after legalization, which was always very impressive. I always like to tell the story about how in Maine, it took 4.5 years for the first, not Maine, Vermont. It took like 4.5 years from legalization to the first dispensary to open. In Oklahoma, it happened practically overnight. And so lots of retailers opened. We're going to talk about this with Adria in a minute. Lots of retailers open. Too many retailers open. Some of them didn't make it. Organized crime came in, and part of the Oklahoma gets blamed for having too much weed there, but way more weed than you can possibly need for the state population. But part of the reason for that is that all these states around Oklahoma, especially Texas, have totally illegal weed. And so what do you expect? You have you make it you have a business friendly attitude, and you have an intention to roll out a system that makes it possible to open a business at a reasonable price and make money on it, and then you have lots of people coming in with nefarious intentions to export to other states where it's not legal. So Oklahoma, in many ways, is a victim of this cross-border arbitrage, and got blamed, I think, for a lot of things. There were also very real problems that we're going to hear about, that I think Adria has been working hard on trying to rein in some of those and kind of stabilize. So that's the top 5.
As fourth runner-up, I'll go ahead and accept our award before the main winner here. I think, first of all, you pronouncing it Nevada. I promise at least 15 people on this webinar did a big sigh of relief, and I'm sure they all appreciate that. I've been involved since before the stores opened in Nevada. So I really appreciate your outlook on Nevada and all the opportunities here. I really still feel for the industry that invested money, and it was kind of like, they laid the groundwork. They are the ones who invested their money. The state just accepted that money and then spent that money on regulation. So I really still want to see the industry pull out of a lot of the losses that they had over the years. But I am still very excited about the outlook on Nevada, and that it's very promising, and like I said, very very happy to hear that we have so many things in our favor for the future, including like you said, the low cost to operate a business and the tourism opportunities. So this has been a very, very exciting project, and I accept the award for fourth runner-up.
I would add to that open-mindedness on the part of regulators, willingness to have conversations, hard conversations. Not everyone has to agree, but it's been really cool. I mean, what you've put together at the CPI and how many different stakeholders you've brought in, and seeing people debate things there is really cool. I also think Nevada harbors a deep desire and always will to defeat California, which I think will work in its favor.
Actually, that reminds me, I do need to give shout outs. I know that former director Tyler Klimas has joined us, and either
Tyler.
current director Jimmy Hum or at least several members of his staff have joined us. So I want to say thank you to them for participating.
Oh yeah, thanks. So Adria, I'm going to talk to you in a minute. I want to go back and hear about your background and have a little conversation. But first, what's your gut feeling about Oklahoma being number one? What's your reaction to that?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. And I think the first time we met at an event, I kind of gave you a hard time and I said, oh yeah, our laissez-faire regulations. Okay, thanks, Robin, for calling us out. I'm trying here because I get a hard time here for not enforcing more, right? Like that's my job. We're supposed to be enforcing these regulations and that's what we're doing. But for many years we weren't. And so, you know, it's complicated, it's complex, it's nuanced, but big picture, the people who were behind the passage of this medical marijuana law in Oklahoma would absolutely love to see this because this is what they wanted. They wanted full access. They wanted there to be no problems having access to medical marijuana. And that's what they were thinking of when they wrote the law. They were not thinking of the need for regulation and the need to put some boundaries around the industry and the need to put some strong testing rules in place, those kind of things. So then we've had to really build backwards. Nobody likes a regulator who puts regulations in after they've started the business, right? And I think we'll talk in a minute about how that's gone down in Oklahoma. But no, I don't think that, you know, like our legislature here would, I mean, I think some of them would think, yeah, of course, Oklahoma's number one. We're a business friendly state and we treat businesses fairly and we have low price of land and low taxes. So yeah, of course we're number one. But that other side of it is, I mean, does access truly reduce the illegal market? I don't know that we're going to prove you right on that theory, Robin. So I think we're going to have to keep talking about that.
It's one factor, you know, and low prices is another. But what do you think are the other factors what are the other kind of factors you know, that are more hidden or that I'm missing about what reduces access to the legal market?
So
Or what reduces access to illegal and increases legal?
I think maybe in the long term, that's what you're looking at is the long term. I'm living in the thick of it, you know? And so right now, the industry in Oklahoma is really feeling the pain of having to be regulated. And they're saying, we're following regulations and they're not, the illegal market's not. And so it's harder on us to stay in business because there's this illegal market that's thriving, shipping maybe to Texas or wherever they're shipping. And so they're finding it unfair. And so while there is access to legal product, there's access to illegal product in Oklahoma. There's access for everyone. And so it's going to take a long time for it to really wash out. So that's why I think we just continue watching and discussing. But right now, our legislature would really prefer to limit some of that access. I mean, they're really looking at how do we limit this because it's too much. We've got an oversupply here. We're shipping out of state for sure. When our governor was in New York on a panel speaking about business issues, he was put on the spot about why there's so much Oklahoma weed in New York. And so, you know, there are all these conversations happening about limiting the access in Oklahoma. So I think there'll just be a lot to watch over the next 10 years to see how it all washes out.
Yeah, that's interesting. In New York, it's funny because there's even more California weed in New York than Oklahoma weed, and one of the funny tough things for legal businesses, legal dispensaries in New York is that they're only allowed to sell New York swag, and they can't sell kind bud from California. So they're getting killed on quality compared to the illegal market. You know, whereas I think Oklahoma's producing high quality weed. Of course, a lot's getting exported illegally, as with California. There's this constant debate about whether going around and shutting down the illegal operators, is that feasible? Does that help? You know, and our kind of position as my economists and my colleagues, you know, it doesn't really affect the market price much. That's the problem. You know, you can shut down a few people, but as long as the prices and overall availability don't change that much, then shutting down a few isn't necessarily going to help the situation. Oklahoma's done about as well as you possibly can in making it easy for legal businesses to thrive on price, to compete on price, which is what, you know, makes it so unique, I think, in many ways. But
Yeah.
it's interesting that it's like too much of a good thing. You do almost too good a job of that, and then you end up with this problem that you're the only one in town doing that, and then people are all flocking to your state.
That is what happened. Yeah. And then we still have, I was looking at the number, we still have 5,000 commercial licensees in Oklahoma. And we had, I think around 12,000 when I first started in 2021. And so 5,000 for a medical state with 4 million people, you can see how the numbers still don't add up. And so all of those 5,000 are fighting for their life, right? And they all want someone to blame if they are going under. And so really the easiest people to blame are the illegal market and the regulators. And so
right.
Here we are.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, like, just taking a step back, how did you get into this? What does one do in one's life to become a weed czar? How did you get into this line of work and end up in the position you're in? And I'd love to hear about some of your experiences.
When the state question was on the ballot in Oklahoma to legalize medical marijuana, I worked for the statewide Chamber of Commerce, the State Chamber of Oklahoma, as basically the like legal person. So I worked on judicial policy, lawsuit reform, tort reform, that kind of fun stuff. I find it fun. And our board voted to oppose the state question that legalized medical marijuana. They said, this is way too broad. There aren't any regulatory, there's no regulatory foresight. There's not enough meat to this law. We're not a fan. We would prefer to talk to the legislature, have them put some meat on this and have them pass it versus put this state question or let this state question pass. Unfortunately, well, it was my job. I went out and I debated against this state question. And so there are still videos out there of me debating against the pro. And I was the con. People thought I was the most evil person. They thought I was just against medical marijuana, right? And I'm like, no, it's just this state question. We'd prefer for it to be done differently. So vote no, and then we'll work with the legislature next session and we'll get it done differently. Regardless, it passed in June of 2018. And my job then was to start working with the legislature pretty quickly because the next session they did pass a bill that put some framework around it. And so I just jumped in feet first into cannabis policy and kind of helped with that. I was one of the people at the table helping with that. And it ended up being called the Unity Bill because there were so many people at the table helping with that. It did not solve all the problems. It was very much just a step one of like very, very, very early on step one, just putting some basic framework in place so that the agency that's regulating had something to guide them, because really they were given no guidance other than issue licenses. Like you said, like just give out the licenses. So then I was working on cannabis policy, and then I ended up working for the governor of Oklahoma. And then long story short, he started getting all these calls specifically from people in rural Oklahoma. Legislators and the governor were getting a ton of calls saying, okay, there's this grow that there are these people that bought all this land next to me in rural Oklahoma, and they're growing all of this marijuana. I don't know if they're legal or illegal, but they are carrying guns. They've got barbed wire. They look like gangsters. We don't know what's happening. This is rural Oklahoma. People were freaking out. This was 2020, 2021. And so basically the governor said, we've got to have a change over at the regulatory agency. He asked if I would step in. And at that moment, I was like, why in the world would I do that? I mean, that was my first question, because it sounded daunting. I mean, whoa, talk about uphill battle. But then the other side of me thought, okay, an opportunity to actually make a change and do some good and impact the program for the better. But I knew that the minute I was named as the director, it was just going to explode that I was opposed to the state question, which it kind of did. But that's the long story short. I took the job in 2021 thinking I'd come in and like build a staff and get some policies and procedures in place and get things in order, and then probably just head on out and go do something else. But now that's, I guess that's been 4 years now. And I keep thinking, okay, once we get this project done, okay, I'll reevaluate how much longer I'll stay. And then I just keep staying and staying,
How supportive of this work has the legislature been? I know in some states where the industry has a much stronger toehold, there's been a lot of division among the legislature itself. So are they kind of all on board with these reforms?
It has been, no, it's the same. And our industry is not together. We don't have a strong industry association at all. They still haven't come together. They kind of cannibalize themselves, and that's what they're known for doing at the legislature. So they haven't had a unified voice. So the legislature's often looking to us to tell them what the best policies are. And we're like, no, man, because if we tell you what to do, that could really harm part of the industry and help some of the industry. And no, we've got to stay in our lane as regulators. So industry goes out and talks to them, but it's split between our House and Senate. Our Senate is really staunch on enforcement and like shut them down. And then our House is a little more industry friendly and thinking about them as business owners. Both sides, though, we as the regulators are going out saying, okay, remember the patients and remember why this is a program. We've got to make sure that we are, yes, industry matters, but let's remember that people are consuming these products, and we've got to have really strong policies around testing and really strong policies around enforcing how things are tested. So that's kind of where we've found our lane is helping everyone remember at the end of the day, there's a consumer or a patient, because it gets lost in the conversation,
What and in terms of recreational, where does it stand right now from your perspective? It's interesting because some of the medical systems I've seen work better than the recreational. In many ways in California with Prop 64, for example, we had a market that was functioning actually more effectively, probably in most ways than before moving from medical to recreational and after. What's the debate there? What point are you at?
Yeah, I think the legislature is not going to do it in Oklahoma right now.
Okay.
But there are people out gathering signatures right now to have another state question put on the ballot. So they're out working on that as we speak. So there are still people who want that done, but when it was put on the ballot 2 years ago, it failed. So I don't know. I think our program is so, the access is so open in Oklahoma. Yes, you have to have a medical card, but we don't have qualifying conditions. It's pretty easy to get a medical card in Oklahoma. So access is still very open. So I don't know that a lot of people see the need to open it up more.
The need, right. Just maybe even more interstate. You end up with just more interstate in a way that you don't want, the kind of stuff you don't want, maybe.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a leading question. What was the toughest moment you faced in your time as a regulator?
The toughest moment? There have been a few. I think every regulator of any industry probably, like you get the push and pull between industry and regulators is tough. With this being a new industry and then having to put enforcements in place, I gained a lot of what I call haters. So had a lot of haters. So there are some people who went to the Supreme Court and just tried to say that I was unqualified and had me fired, the state Supreme Court. And they also simultaneously had this rally outside our building to have me fired, and they put like my face on a t-shirt, and that was tough, but yeah, you can share. That was one tough moment. So my boss is
These t-shirts are so amazing. I love that you obtained one and are proudly displaying it.
And if you're a regulator and you don't have a t-shirt, you're not doing your job.
Well, that's it. I do share it with my colleagues in Canada, and they kind of keep score. They're like, man, nobody's put my face on a t-shirt. And we found some products in our industry. Some of our inspectors found some products named after me. And I told some of our my colleagues, they're like, man, nobody's named a product after me. I'm like, well, maybe you can get there one day. I don't know. So
yeah, it's an honor. It's a great honor.
Is it a small town the way Nevada is? I met with somebody yesterday who I'd reached out to them. I cold called them. I don't know them. Halfway through the meeting, we realized our kids go to the same school. We know each other. We've met before. Is it like that? Because you must, you're these owners, you must know them, some of them personally, if it's like Nevada.
Kind of, it is. Oklahoma is one very small town, or yeah, we know somebody that knows somebody, definitely, for sure. I would say a lot of the people who are the loud ones in the industry that definitely don't like regulation and did the rally and all of that, they're people, a lot of them are just people who never owned a business before, and this was their dream. And so they just get upset, and they want to put that anger somewhere. But as far as like knowing any of them personally, I really haven't. But I kind of have become more cautious in this role. I don't just go out and about as much as I used to, because I know there are a lot of people that just really don't like me. So I just kind of stay to myself a little bit more.
When you look in the future, if you had to look 5 or 10 years in the future, what do you see as being the kind of best case scenario for Oklahoma? What are the factors that would lead Oklahoma to success and peace and harmony and everyone making money, no one angry kind of stuff?
That would be beautiful. Yeah, we've got to get the organized crime that came into our state out, because that's the reputation right now. When I get a call from media or anybody outside of Oklahoma, they're asking me about organized crime and about like the Chinese Communist Party coming into Oklahoma. So that has become the reputation. When unfortunately, like, I know the actual Oklahomans who own so many of these businesses, and this is what they've chosen to invest their lives and their savings into, and they're Oklahomans, and they are just trying to survive. So I would see it as we've got to get the organized crime, the things that have come with that, which are the sex trafficking and the labor trafficking and the terrible stuff that we hear about. It's put a terrible mark on the industry, unfortunately. So we have to have law enforcement help us get that out so that the industry can become a valid and respected industry in Oklahoma. But what I need the industry to do is to never forget that they have a patient or a consumer at the end of the day. And so while economics matter, this is a consumable product. And we don't have a lot of licensees, commercial licensees, who actually use good manufacturing processes. They're not required to under our laws. And then if they do, then it's an extra cost. So then, to me, what are we doing? I want them to be using good manufacturing processes. I want them to be producing products that are healthy and safe, and that nobody has to question that. And right now, you do have to question that still, because profit is the motive a lot of times.
Yeah, profit's almost always the motive in business, but you can run a profitable business ethically or not. And it's interesting. Were these? I mean, I'm curious about the organized crime. Was it coming in from out of state? Was it new elements that you hadn't seen before in Oklahoma, or was it just kind of emerging out of the woodwork?
I think that is the question, and I don't have as much intel as our law enforcement partners do, and I don't mind that. But they're working on it. But the story started coming out around 2020, so post the medical marijuana question passing. And I think I told you guys a story about, because we require residency to have a license. And we had this lawyer that basically set up a shop saying, I'll pay an Oklahoman to put their name on a license for you. And he brought in people from California, from Oregon, from Colorado, put an Oklahoman's name on the license, but they were truly the owners. And so we started referring to them as straw owners or ghost owners. And so there are theories that some of them came in that way. And so then we didn't even know they were on the license because they were hidden behind somebody else's name. So then our staff had to become more adept at digging in, layers deeper while we're doing a license application process. So it's been a process of learning how all the criminal elements came in. But we have meetings with law enforcement and try to learn the most that we can and do our part on the licensing side so that they can't hide behind a license, because I do think that was happening.
We have a question from Jarrett. Hi, Jarrett. About THCA hemp and in particular hemp-derived edibles and beverages. I'm curious, how do you think that the rise of the hemp market, Adria, the hemp market in general, but in particular the THC beverage market and THC gummies that sold as hemp in Texas and elsewhere, how is that impacting Oklahoma? How do you think about that in terms of the impacts on you and on your state?
Yeah, our industry is very upset about them in Oklahoma right now. Our advisory council has asked us to work with the legislature to put something in place to make sure they're at least regulated, just like they are. They feel like it's cutting into their business models here in Oklahoma. I don't like it because I think, they're not, I don't know where they're coming from, and they are in gas stations in Oklahoma. So I think that if people are going to sell THCA or any hemp-derived products, they need to be regulated. Just like everything else. And I think that's been the issue with Texas, is like nobody's been regulating them. So they just exploded. They're just everywhere. So
yeah, to push a little more on that, one interesting thing I've observed in terms of beverages is that in states that have legal marijuana systems, legal cannabis systems, beverages don't sell very well in dispensaries. It's not the context where people think about buying them, and a bunch of other reasons. Maybe they're more expensive. Whereas in these hemp states, where they're sold kind of side by side with beer and distributed by the beer industry, basically, you have this big market for them. How do you feel about the opportunity for THC beverages? Do you think there's a way to integrate it into the medical market in Oklahoma, or other ways of kind of realizing that opportunity without without being unfairly competed with by hemp?
I think what I know in Oklahoma is that some of the beer lobbyists have already told me that they're going to ask the legislature to give it to them next year to let the alcohol regulator regulate those. And I know that that's what they're going to do, and they have a strong lobby. So I think that that's what they're going to do. I personally, I mean, there are issues with that because it's not medical. I don't, we're a medical state. I don't know. I think there's so much of the conversation I haven't even delved into. So I don't really know what to think, but I know that the beverages are already there. When I go buy wine, they're already selling these beverages. So yes, I think they need to be regulated. That would be the only fair thing to do.
For sure, yeah. So
We
they're
have
out
time
there.
for one more question, and it's for Director Berry, from Agnes Bala, who's in the California Governor's Office and organized a really great California Research Symposium with researchers from all over the country. Thank you, Agnes, for joining us. Does Oklahoma have any program or ways in which the state supports research?
Oh, I wish. And I'm so glad you told me that Agnes is from California, because Nicole Elliott is one of my closest allies and colleagues. She's the one that introduced me to Robin. And you would never think, like, politically that Oklahoma and California would have a lot in common, but our markets, as far as the things we're facing, and like we have a lot of the same issues. And so we talk a lot. And I really like her. So, and she's so smart. But do we have any program or ways in which the state supports research? No. And I'm jealous of how California does it. And I hope that we can one day have something like that. Our legislature hasn't really prioritized that kind of thing. And they're really not, they almost would just rather not have to think about cannabis. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of what they've done. And so I just have to bring them things that need to be done. And I think research is a little ways down the road for them to give us anything on.
Same with Nevada. I'm going to try again in 2 years. I want to say one thing so I can sleep tonight. When I mentioned our directors of our regulators, I needed to mention current chairman of the Clark County Commission, who passed the legalization bill in Nevada and gave us a great foundation for it. So I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight if I didn't mention Tiger Bloom, who a lot of people around the country know him because he was the founder of the industry in Nevada. Do you guys have any final comments?
No, I just want to say I wish we could talk for another hour here. Go ahead, Adria.
This was very fun. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, I was a little nervous, but this ended up being very fun.
Thank you, Director Berry.
Really fun.
Thank you, Robin, for doing like an inception style where you told me this is a good idea, and then it grew and grew and grew, and then we finally did it.
It was your idea, so thank you, Riana, and thanks, Natalie, and your team. Yeah, this was awesome.
That's funny. Okay, thanks. Bye.